Team Liquid recently signed Magnus Carlsen as one of 2 chess players on their until now esports only focused team. Erik, on your opinion, what are the first 2 TCG players that will be signed by an esports team like Team Liquid?
Oh man, that's a good question. I guess it depends on whatever game people think is big right now. I think One Piece is a very easy thing to get into. They're doing a lot of collabs anyway, so I'll just say Jackson Hong from One Piece. I would say if any big org comes in and swoops up a TCG player, it'll probably be him. Sure.
Perfect, man. I'm excited to hear your opinion further on this topic because that's like the core part of this podcast, competing in TCGs in general, in the gaming sphere, but also your background in games and also in casting these huge esports events. But also recently you're getting into like TCGs, actually a little bit more than you might have expected like 20 years ago. But before we come to that, actually, let's welcome all the viewers to this episode of the Fabled Academy podcast, which is actually the 17th episode. I am your host, Alex, and with me, of course, is the amazing Erik Lonnquist, also known as DoA. Thank you so much for taking the time, Erik.
Happy to be here. It's been a few years since we chatted, so I'm excited to catch up and talk card games.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think like the occasion and we met in was really special as well. It was like my second time traveling to the US.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was crazy, actually. It was the World Championship, the first one for Flesh and Blood back in San Jose in 2022. And actually, like I said, it was my second time traveling to the US and was like a very short one. I only packed my backpack and then I flew in on Friday and I stayed at the hotel until Sunday and then flew back to Germany, which was like pretty crazy for me.
Well, those are some long flights too. I mean, I've done like a weekend where when I was living in Korea, I did a weekend event in New York. And so that was like 15 hours each way, you know? So Germany to San Jose, that's got to be pretty close to that, right?
Yeah, it was a really long flight also because I had to get the cheapest one. And so I had to stay for like 12 hours in the airport of Amsterdam in between.
No. All right. That's rough.
But for you, it was a very special event as well, right? You were casting the first World Championship in Flesh and Blood back then.
Yeah, it was great. It was an awesome time. I had been playing the game just for fun, and I had kind of told myself that, okay, this is going to be something in gaming that I just do for me. It's for fun. I'm not going to turn it into work at all. And then I got an offer to cast a World Championship, and I was like, well, I'm not going to turn this down, you know. And so yeah, it was actually my first card game cast because I had done esports for well over 10 years at that point. And funny enough, I had played card games. I started playing card games and going to tournaments in like the late 90s with Magic the Gathering and the old Star Wars Decipher CCG. But through all the esports stuff, I had just never found time, never really, looked for the opportunities to do card game stuff because I'd been so busy in the video game space that when this came along, I was like, well, I got to do this. It's going to be really fun. And it was great. Michael Hamilton obviously put on an amazing performance that tournament and a well deserving first champion for that game. And there were so many other great games. We had Chris Alawi from the Los Angeles area in second. So got to kind of cast one of our hometown heroes, from SoCal, which is where I live and I play. So it was a great tournament all around. I'm not doing a lot with Flesh and Blood right now, but the game was really great at the time, and I'm glad I had that opportunity. It was fun.
And surprisingly, like from there on, you had also other experiencing casting in TCGs, right? Just get all the viewers on board. Like, what kind of experiences did you get to cast in TCGs?
Yeah, well, so I guess after that, the next one would have been the first big Battle Spirit Saga event in North America, which is a Bandai card game, and they had approached me for that because one of the people that was organizing it knew me from esports and also knew that I had done Flesh and Blood, that I was a card game player, and they were like, do you want to come out and do this? So I was like, yeah. So I learned the game in about a month or so and then went out and commentated that, and that was a lot of fun. That game didn't end up doing too great in the US, which is funny because it's the second time they tried to do a Battle Spirits card game in the US, and it hasn't worked each time. But the game itself was really good, but you're just not going to be able to compete in that space against like the other, big Bandai card games, right? The Digimons, the One Pieces, and all that. So it's too bad because the game was very interesting mechanically, but it just doesn't seem like it's gonna stick. Excuse me. But yeah, did that. And then from there, it went to One Piece casting. And that was another card game that I had seen before. There was a lot of people, moving over to it and playing it. I hadn't tried it yet, but when the opportunity came along, I jumped in, learned the game, and it's a lot deeper than I initially gave it credit for. It's a great card game. I started watching the show because I'm like, well, if I'm commentating this card game, like I got to know the universe, like I owe it to the community, and I was trying to take my broadcast work very seriously, right? Where it's like I want to make sure I'm doing justice to the community around this game and showing them that I'm not just there, right? That I do care. And so I'm 600 episodes deep in the show now and have that awareness. I get it now. I get it. I get why people are such big One Piece fans. Like, it's a really, really good show. The world building is really interesting. The card game is great. So I've done a bunch of events with them, man. Like a few national championships, coming up on the second world championship soon. I'm flying out, not this weekend, but next weekend to do the first One Piece Day in Dallas, which is going to be really fun because they're going to run something like 6 500-person tournaments or something like that. It's crazy. Like, it's a big kickoff for this year's for that, but a lot to cast there. The Gundam TCG is coming out now. I've been a big Gundam fan since I was a kid, and so there's a lot to talk about with that, and I've been doing some content around that on my channels. There's a miniature game coming out, and I'm a tabletop gamer, and I love painting minis. Yeah, I used to compete. I took a break after my kid was born in 2023, but I used to compete in like Warhammer painting competitions and things like that.
Really?
And win some, yeah. So at the local level in Los Angeles. But yeah, so that's right up my alley as well. So it's funny, the last since we talked, since that first Flesh and Blood event in 2022, I've kind of started to make a bit of a career shift from esports to more tabletop and card gaming, and that's where a lot of my original gaming kind of life was, So it's been a smooth transition. It's been really fun, and I don't know what the future holds. I'm just kind of enjoying it, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, so far so good with that.
Man, that's like a crazy run through just the last few years for you.
It's been
but
wild.
There's also a crazy backpack of experiences you have working in esports, and then just starting your career back, because you said it already that you started with TCGs in the late 90s, and then games like StarCraft 2 and League of Legends came in the round. So you had seen a lot of the sphere in gaming in general. And I also want to talk with you about that exactly in this podcast, not only about competing in TCGs, but drawing a line between competing in games in general, and specifically this rise that we have with these TCGs and the so-called new era of TCGs, because you also experienced the boom in the early 2000s, I think, with Magic the Gathering, Pokémon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and other games coming up and having widely success. And nowadays we have Flesh and Blood, One Piece, and all these other games that you mentioned.
Yeah.
But I want to start with a very a little bit of a time travel actually, because these days actually playing in TCGs and playing in the gaming sphere in general is seen as this trendy thing. There are a lot of wealthy people. There are a lot of loved figures in this hobby, and back then, it wasn't really like that, right? I think you experienced that yourself.
No. I mean, when I started playing TCGs in 95, I think was the first time I played Magic. And I, got some cards and things like that. And we were the weird kids that stayed inside at recess. And while all the other kids were out, playing kickball or whatever, we were getting a couple rounds in of Magic or Star Wars, And so, yeah, it wasn't just, you weren't just a nerd at that point. You were the nerdiest of the nerds, for better or worse. And nerd was not a cool thing to be in the 90s, in the late 90s. So, but we didn't care. We were doing what we wanted to do, and it was fun, and it just really hit that competitive gaming itch that I had since, basically as far back as I can remember, And so practicing during recess, and then we go to the tournaments, the locals after school and all that, and yeah, it was the card game stores themselves were doing really well, mostly on the back of Magic the Gathering, and then and Star Wars, the Decipher Star Wars CCG. There was a time, this sounds hard to believe now, but there was a time when like some stores had like more Star Wars players than Magic players. That game actually went
crazy.
toe to toe with Magic. Yeah, for sure, for a lot of years. And so around those two games, there were then a lot of opportunities for other games to come up. Like Pokemon is a big one, obviously, that came up. Yu-Gi-Oh! Too. And then you had all these other games. It was a lot like it is now. That's why I think you can draw that comparison, because everything was a card game, right? We had an Alien versus Predator card game. We had BattleTech, which was a big card game, or Mech Warrior. I can't remember which one it was called exactly, but it was that universe. We had the first Dragon Ball card game. Digimon, I think, wasn't too far behind that. Star Trek. There was a Wheel of Time card game, if you can believe that. Yeah,
really?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, there was a Decipher Lord of the Rings card game, TCG, that was in the early 2000s, maybe 99. I think it's early 2000s. Yeah, it was early 2000s for sure. But just like, yeah, at that point, everyone was just trying to make card games, right? Because there was this big boom and everyone was playing them and all that. And then it kind of fell off. But like this era that we're in now, that was kind of weirdly kicked off by the pandemic, is sort of the second golden age, right? Where everybody's making a card game. A lot of people are trying it. The card stores are booming. It's really great to see. So I'm glad that I feel fortunate that I'm getting to see like another kind of golden age for TCGs right now.
Yeah. I think this golden age or this new era of TCGs that we are just experiencing is something like so special that maybe if you haven't played back then in the early 2000s, or if you weren't really growing up with TCGs, this may feel like the first time, but I'm having the same feelings as you, that back then I was really, really young back then. I couldn't really compete in local tournaments, or I didn't even have a store in the countryside where I was growing up, but I was reading magazines back then about like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championships and like these Pharaoh tours that were big in Yu-Gi-Oh! Back then, and these prize cards that you can win. I didn't really hear anything about Magic, honestly, because that's really not the age group that I was growing up with, but Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! For sure. Yeah. Those were the two big things. And as I was growing older, I was experiencing like the YCS tournaments in Yu-Gi-Oh! And it was during like 2016 when this passion came really big into my life again. And there the community was like really small. But what I'm seeing and experiencing now is that the TCG community just in general is like huge. And also the possibilities and the opportunities for playing in these games is like widely different than what we had back then. Of course, with all of these environments that the games are giving us at the moment, also with a new game popping up like Disney Lorcana, Flesh and Blood, Star Wars Unlimited, having like a pro circuit just right from the scratch, right? They're starting the game and they're saying like, we have this pro circuit here, just come and be our first world champion, just like with Disney Lorcana in this year, for example. So I'm really like interested in your opinion here now. What do you think like makes this era that we are in now a little bit different from what we have experienced in the like first golden age, so to say?
I think there's sort of I would say a change. There's been such a design change in terms of card games, right? Where there was a lot of sort of sameness in card games, I think back then. A lot of people trying to sort of like, either copy the Star Wars style or the Magic style, right? In terms of resource management, things like that. And now it feels like everyone's just trying to be very unique, And there's some similarities between some games and all that, but I think the variety of game mechanics is on a level now that wasn't there before. I think this era too, like you said, with tournament circuits already, with companies having organized play in mind when they start a game, right? All these new ones, Star Wars Unlimited, all that kind of stuff. That was not really a consideration back then, right? Where they were just like, here's this game, go play it, right? And it was on the local communities to organize tournaments around the games. There wasn't a lot of support right off the bat. It came fairly quickly once these companies saw, how interested people were in competing, but it wasn't really maybe a plan from the very start, if that makes sense, It's funny too, because you talk about living out in the country. I did too. I was in a very rural area. I had to drive like 30 miles to the nearest town, which was like the biggest town around was like 12,000 people, to play in my, card shops. Right. And we would get, 20, 30 people or whatever. But then, on some weekends, okay, this town, an hour this way is having a tournament. This town an hour this way is having a tournament. So nothing was very huge, but we were, going around the area and playing in what we could. But, I'm glad to see so many people trying card games right now. I'm not going to say that the card game community is like more welcoming now than it was before, because I think it was just as welcoming back then. Back then, the attitude was the same, where like you didn't care who it was. You were just really happy anybody wanted to try card games and wanted to play and get competitive, right? So I don't think that's changed. I think we're just as welcoming as we've always been, in my opinion, at least in my experience anyway, But I think the variety is good. And I think right now we also have a good balance of entry-level card games and then like more advanced card games, right? We've got the Lorcana, like the Pokémons, things like that, to get like newer players into the game, which is great. We need those kind of card games. And then we've got sort of the higher end, more complex ones, like Flesh and Blood is obviously, I think, like the Cadillac of competitive card games right now, where it offers, probably the most complexity, sometimes to its detriment, I would say, but certainly great on a competitive level. And then you've got other games that are sort of in the middle, right, where like I really love Star Wars Unlimited because it's got a very low barrier to entry. The text on the cards is easy to understand, right? But the implementation of those cards in the average game is very deep and very complex, mostly because of the basic game mechanics with their action system. But so you've got these great this great mix of card games right now where there's something kind of for everybody, right? IP wise and game mechanics wise.
Yeah, definitely. There's like a wild field of options that players can just first look at and really dive into, also with like, for every game being so much content out there these days, right?
Yeah,
Not like back then. I was relying on like one or two magazines, hopefully coming up in that one like small store coming in the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
But these days I'm just going on Google or YouTube and typing in what deck is the best in Star Wars Unlimited, and I'm getting like 10 videos to watch, or what is the best meta deck for Flesh and Blood and stuff like that. It's like so easy to dive into these worlds actually. And then also with like, yeah, of course, the globally, the global systems that we have, like buying cards from everywhere, for example, that was also a huge thing, I think, back then, that I was struggling with a lot, because I was seeing in these magazines like what cards were played and what was really powerful.
Oh, same,
but I had like no way of getting these cards, right? And now I can just go on Card Market, or if you're living in the US, you can go to TCG Player, and with a click of one button, you get the whole deck delivered to you in 2 days, right?
Yeah, the product accessibility is a lot. That is a level of accessibility that's very different from before, which I think is kind of a double-edged sword, right? You've really there's really a world now where anyone, like you said, can just like order the cards they need, right? But at the same time, I do think that kind of takes a little bit of the fun out of it. There used to be such a fun sort of like mini game with playing these card games that was the wheeling and dealing of trade binders, right? You'd always bring your trade binder, and like, now nobody trades at these locals really or anything like that. They're like, if I need a card, I'll just buy it. It's like, no, I miss that, where it's like, well, I'll give you these 4 cards for this one card and all that. The wheeling and dealing was a lot of fun. And there was a sense of discovery back then that doesn't exist now, where now every card in a set, right? You've seen it all because it's all on the internet. Back then, you would have those magazines, like you said, there was like Scry and stuff like that. But a lot of times you might see like a card list, right, where they had like the name of every card in a set, but you'd go to locals and you'd see cards you'd never seen before, and you'd be like, whoa, wait, that exists? Like, I got to get that now, for my deck, And so that sort of feeling of discovery was really fun, I think, too, where when you went to a local, when you opened packs, you just didn't know what you were going to find, because it wasn't all pre-spoiled, And as someone who kind of makes a living on content, obviously, like, I appreciate the world we're in right now, with all that, but part of me does still miss sort of that feeling of venturing into the unknown and exploration that used to exist in card games that we don't really get. And so that it's a little bit sad now that players don't get to experience it in that way. But the world moves on, right?
Yeah, I'm totally on your side here. That's like the core of why I even entered TCGs. I think that was the surprising moments of going to the schoolyard with my Yu-Gi-Oh deck. And then I knew, like, from the magazines, okay, these 3 cards are like very powerful. I'm looking for them, but there was like very few players that even had access to that card. And then you needed to find someone who was willing to trade that one card. And I specifically remember a moment I'm not sure. I think you are not very familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh, but
Not super
there is a
familiar, no.
card. It's a card called Black Luster Soldier.
Okay.
It's a card that was very, very powerful back then. It's still very powerful today. But back then, like, no one had it. And I remember that one day where I was going to school in the morning, coming from the bus, and then like that one kid had it and he was wanting to trade it. And I was like, what do you want? I give you everything. And I was coming late to school because we were negotiating like what kind of cards he wanted from me. But in the end, I got that card. And it's crazy that these times, as you said, that kind of spark is really lost. But I also think like you can kind of get the spark yourself if you want, because you don't really need to buy everything online, right? There are still like these events and these tournaments that you can go through, even those locals. And so if you want that kind of experience, you have to craft it yourself these days.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what everyone really wants these days in cards, in trading cards, is competing and winning. And I really want to know your opinion on this, because I think at a time where I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh, you were not really that big into like card game competitions yourself, but you were very big into like competing in esports.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to know like what makes the core of competing in esports in your opinion.
I think it's the same thing, really, right? Where we're taking these game systems that we really like, whether it's the game system around a card game or the game system around something like StarCraft or League of Legends, and we're just striving to be the best, right? There's really no difference aside from the tools that you're using to compete, right? One's a mouse and keyboard, one's a deck of cards, but the principles are still the same, right? Where I'm gonna learn this system the best I can, and then find ways to break it and beat my opponent. And so for me, I love competing, but what I really love more is looking at how other people break that system, right? And watching other people sort of like make those plays and then telling those stories. You know, I mean, really being a sportscaster at the end of the day is being you're part journalist, part storyteller, right? And I've always loved the sports story of someone who can come from anywhere, right? And just get really good at this thing and then beat the world, right? So it's that story of kind of coming out of nowhere, right, and being this champion has always really appealed to me, and that's something that's drawn me in esports. It's something that drew me in card games, and you know, I feel like I'm a good player when it comes to card games and when it comes to video games and things like that. But I knew long ago that I would never be the best player. You know, I just don't have that skill. You know. But I think what I do have is the ability to talk really well and tell those stories and entertain people, and I love doing that, so that's always where my focus kind of was esports wise. And the only time I ever really took a break, I would say, from card games, not a complete break, but just didn't go to tournaments and things, was when I lived in Korea, just because there simply wasn't a big English language scene for any games out there, and so I just didn't have a place to play. And I don't like Sims. I don't like playing these card games online because I feel like that sort of like takes away what I love, which is going to a store and being across the table from someone and having that in person, that flesh and blood interaction, if you will,
Yeah.
So it was really hard for me to stay into card games. But as soon as I moved back to the US, I immediately got a bunch of Magic cards again and started going to locals and things. And so, as soon as I could, I was back into it.
Wow, yeah, that is like one of the big aspects, I think, that is differentiating esports competition from TCG competition. That, of course, you can train online in TCGs as well. There are also like digital trading card games. They are not really traded like in physical, but there is a similarity. But if you want to be like the Flesh and Blood World Champion, for example, you have to go to locals, you have to sit down on your opponent at the same table. And even though there are like esports bars, we have one in our city here in Germany as well now opening up, that you can go to and like kind of sit in front of each other and play against, but it's a different experience, right? But there is also like, I think, one huge like connecting factor, and that is like that I think both are really extreme on your health, on the more on the bad side, I think. And it was kind of funny because I was like searching for you on YouTube, and there was a video popping up where you were explaining like how to sit the right way so it doesn't really hurt on your back, right? So I assume
wow,
it was like 4 years ago, I think.
Okay, I don't even remember that, but I wouldn't be surprised. I there's a bunch of stuff I don't even remember shooting anymore. But I mean, yeah, I think. But people say that sometimes, where there's the the health risks of gaming and all that kind of stuff. But I've always been like, yeah, sure, but there's health risks with any career, right? I mean, you work in a factory, you're going to get repetitive stress injuries. You're going to work, if you work in an office, you're going to have that, right? There's no difference between sitting in front of a computer, practicing esports versus sitting in front of a computer in an office, right? You're still sedentary. You're still going to deal with those same things. So it's really, no matter what your career is, whether you're working in a factory, or an office, or in an esports, team house, you just have to take care of yourself outside of that, right? You have to be, responsible with your diet. You have to be responsible with your exercise. And I have to get better at that right now. I've slipped since my kid was born. I think I've gained like 15 pounds. It's bad. We're working on it. We're working on getting back in shape this year. But yeah, I think whenever someone's like, oh, it's just not a healthy profession, or it's just not a healthy thing, I'm like, yeah, but like everything is that way, right? I mean, you have to pick a career, right? Football player. Oh, these people are amazing athletes. Yeah, but a bunch of them are getting like brain injuries and,
Oh, yeah.
knees, ankles, like long lasting ligament injuries that like debilitate them after their career is done. So try telling me that being a professional athlete in traditional sports is a healthier way to go than being an esports player. Like I just don't, I definitely do not see that, right? So I think no matter what career you have in life, it's how you mitigate whatever health risks come along with that through, your diet and your exercise and just taking care of yourself, So yeah, people say that, but I'm like, yeah, whatever. I mean, you have to look at it in a bigger scale than just that, right? You can't look at everything. You can't look at esports in a vacuum and be like, that's unhealthy. Don't do that. When all these other careers present the exact same risks.
Exactly. Yeah. I think like also looking at it from a bigger sphere, I'm very interested in what you have seen in esports because you were there from the beginning, and then also have seen like how the scene slowly but surely got more professional. And we talked about like Team Liquid, for example, in the beginning. You've seen like kind of that like transition, right? Where also like teams got like personal trainers, for example, and also like getting on a diet and how to exercise to be prepared for a tournament. Do you see like similar things happening in TCGs in the future? Or do you think like TCGs will go down a little bit of different road?
I don't know. I don't know how big TCG competitions are going to get on a mainstream scale. It's interesting because there were definitely eras of esports before I got in. But this era was the one where, people really started, it became a buzzword and it got a lot of investment and people tried to make it like professional sports, which wasn't a good idea in the end, But I think as far as like, TCG player houses, teams, all that, we see teams pop up, but to get on the level where they've got like a team house with like a chef and a personal trainer and all that, like, I don't know. I would love to see it get to that level, but it's going to take a lot more tournament and like competitive support than what we have right now, because what we have right now are big circuits from the developers of these card games, which is great, but that in itself isn't enough to support a professional career, really, right? These players, if they want to really make a living doing it, most of them have to have some sort of like content creation platform that they're drawing an income from as well, right? If I would love a world where players can just play, but that's going to require multiple tournament circuits and more opportunities to compete for significant sums, which could happen, sure. But I think the problem that you run into a lot of times with that is, or we would run into with TCGs, is the same problem that you run into with esports, right? Where the companies that make the game don't necessarily want to let other people run big tournaments because they want their thing to be the biggest. And that is, I understand that mentality from, we make the game, we want to control the scene, but I think that is a self-defeating sort of attitude, because if you really truly want your game to grow and be big, you will want to, encourage more people to be running tournaments, because first of all, it's less cost to you, right? If you've got these third parties that are running these big events and all that, as long as they're, treating your IP in the way that you agree with, right? Which I think there always should be an agreement between an organizer and the stakeholder on the IP side to make sure that's being done, But, the more people that are running these big things, for you, essentially you're saving money, you're getting, low cost promotion, right? For your title, it's bringing in more people. But there's this weird, in esports, there was this strange insistence on, we made the game, so we must control all of the scenes that grow around our game, which is it's a logical fallacy. I think you don't need to control that. In fact, it's to your own detriment. So I hope that a lot of these card game companies will take a lesson from esports and say that if we really want to have a competitive scene that gets to that level, right, that we need to loosen control a little bit and allow it to grow, allow it to thrive, and mostly allow it to become sustainable, right? You need to be okay with third-party tournaments and broadcasting companies being able to make income and make profit from this, right? Because they have staff that they need to pay. These people need to live, right? And so there needs to be money going into it on that side too. And you need to be okay with that as a game-making company if you really want to see your game reach that level that we're talking about here, So will it happen in TCGs? I think that's entirely on the people that make the game, knowing how to treat their scenes with the right level of attention, and the right level of freedom. So we'll see. We'll see.
You also touched on something like very interesting here, because you've seen like the different like stages that esports has been while wanting to be a competition environment for players to actually be in. And one of the very heavy ones that I actually didn't knew about for the most of my life, being in the TCG here in the last 3 years, but then suddenly a documentary popping up on YouTube all the time. And I was like, why is this documentary like being pushed out to me? It was a really big one. And it was a one that was like telling the story of the Overwatch League. And actually, like, I'm not that big into digital games these days anymore, even though I've played a lot of League of Legends in my school days and also while I was studying with my friends. But then afterwards, didn't really recognize with me anymore. And so I didn't knew what Overwatch was. And then I was clicking on that documentary. I was watching it all the way through. And then you were also in there.
Oh,
so for everyone that doesn't really know what the Overwatch League was and what really happened in there and what could happen also to TCG tournaments in the future if they get pumped up even more, maybe you can draw a line here and tell a little bit of the story of what happened there.
Well, sure. So, I mean, the Overwatch League was I would describe it as a very preventable tragedy where, we had the league start and there was a lot of money coming into it. The team slots for this franchise were like 20 to 30 million or so, which was much higher than I realized it was when I signed on to be part of this. I did not think it would be that big. When I found that out, I was like, okay, that seems like a lot. I don't like that sort of, pushes out a lot of the endemic organizations. But if we do have that much money coming in, we can truly make something great and, hopefully make something sustainable. Unfortunately, the people that were in charge of spending that money did a pretty poor job of it when it comes to things like we had a studio in Burbank, California at the Burbank Studios, and that studio was the same soundstage that Johnny Carson and then Jay Leno shot The Tonight Show on for like 50 years, right? It was Johnny Carson, Jay Leno, and then me in the Overwatch League, And that studio was incredibly, incredibly expensive. And we could have taken any studio space in Burbank, right? We could have got something, a mile or two down the road for a fraction of the cost. But the people that were running this league, not endemic esports people, by the way, these were business people from traditional sports, higher ups at Blizzard Activision, people that were not connected to the esports community, were making these decisions to try to be big and be flashy, and ultimately wasted a colossal amount of money, right? That could have been done to make the league sustainable. At the same time, things that we were told were going to happen, like, there were some team skins, but we were told there were going to be like autographed like gun skins, things that you could put into the game that fans could purchase to support the teams. A lot of that we were told were going to happen did not happen. So they were simultaneously way overspending and not delivering on the things that would have actually made the league sustainable long term, right? So that is, that obviously isn't going to be something that works forever, right? I will say to their credit a little bit, or at least to be merciful to them a little bit, the pandemic really hamstrung them as far as the next phase of what that league was supposed to be. I quit at the end of 2019 because I really didn't like how things were run. But before I left, I was part of a lot of the conversations about 2020, right? And if that pandemic hadn't happened, the league would have become the sort of traveling show that it was always intended to be, where there would have been different events happening in different cities around the U.S., around the world every week. All the flights were booked for all the talent. Like everything was set, right? The venues were chosen, everything was ready to go. And then the pandemic happened that completely derailed it, right? So that obviously did hurt the league quite a bit. But would that have hurt the league as much if the spending and the financial management of the league hadn't been so bad for the last 2 years? In year 2, they tried to cut the salaries of all the talent on camera. They cut a lot of the side content. They cut some of our shows and just kind of like named parts of the opening segments shows. So there are already cuts happening or attempted cuts happening. They tried to cut my pay again at the end of 2019, which is one of the reasons why I left, because I'm like, on the one hand, we're having meetings where they're telling us we're exceeding their viewership expectations and everything's going great. On the other hand, they're like, oh, and would you like a 30%, 40% pay cut too? And, so clearly the writing on the wall was that this was not going well. And it's too bad, right? Because the game itself is great. Overwatch is a fantastic game. It was like I still think it's the best ability shooter that's ever been made, even now, right? But again, like the problems around esports are not actually esports related, if that makes sense. Like competitive gaming isn't the issue here. And the amount of people that want to watch competitive gaming isn't the issue here. Both of those things exist and they're great. And there's more people that want to watch competitive gaming now than there have ever been. But the business practices around esports have just been so bad in North America. And this insistence on controlling the scenes has been so insane from these game making companies that they, have basically ran the NA industry into the ground. And then you've got, the damage that was done in Korea as well, when these companies came in and took over their games, right? Broadcasters were forced out of business over there. The one I worked for 5 years is just gone now. So I don't even remember what the original question was. I just went off on my esports TED Talk. But yeah, I mean, I think this is all a great lesson for the TCG community, because we are in this position now where there's a ton of people playing. There's more people playing every day. And if it does continue to grow, we need to be ready to grow things in a sustainable way, and not try to be too flashy, not try to be too controlling, and really just be, sustainable, stay true to the grassroots, right? And like grow this in a way where, everybody who's making this thing benefits appropriately, and I think there's companies that are doing a good job of that so far. And so hopefully that'll continue,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lesson learned that can transition over to TCGs, as you said. And I think like looking at the players that are actually competing in these like leagues, in these tournaments, in these circuits that we have in TCGs, do you think people are like coming to these events for the same reasons as they are trying to get to the top in esports? Because competition is competition in every way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Either if you're an athlete in sports, if you're playing as an esports athlete, or if you're competing as a TCG player. In my opinion, everyone comes because they want to win. Of course, everyone also wants to have fun. But if
Sure.
you're asking like, most of the players at a Flash and Blood Pro Tour, they are coming because they want to win the Pro Tour, or they at least want to try
Of course,
their
yeah.
best, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how is your view on this throughout the last like years?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's coming to try to win. Yeah, I mean, you've got your mix, right? When you've got a tournament that's hundreds and hundreds of people, some of them are going to be there to just get some promo cards and have a good time, and that's fine. Other ones are going to be there to win, and that's great too. I think the big thing, tournament-wise and experience-wise, is we need to get better on the broadcasting side of things, of telling these player stories and giving people people to root for, right? Because at the end of the day, sports succeeds when you have human beings to root for, So if we're not doing a good job of telling those stories at these events, then people are, only going to be interested in the playing side, and they're not going to be as invested in the viewing side, right? And again, telling those human stories, is going to be a bump to content creation people that work on that. It's going to be a bump to viewership for those tournaments, which is going to make the money that's, spent on the broadcast on those tournaments more worthwhile. So, I think the biggest thing to me is that we need to get better at the broadcasting side and telling those stories, and I'm trying my best to push that all forward, but again, we'll see, right? Ultimately, if I really want to control it, I'd have to start my own broadcast company, but we're not there yet. I'm close. I want to do that. I got to do that at some point, I feel like.
Man, yeah, that's a very good point that you're making. I think that also aligns with what I was drawing a comparison between like the sports that I follow and then also looking at the TCG scene. Because from entering the Yu-Gi-Oh! Competitive scene in 2016, I remember so many amazing players that don't really are recognized for what they have accomplished. And then I was discovering like, okay, there's a game called Magic the Gathering. There's also a huge Pokémon industry of like players going to the World Championship, traveling around the world.
Mhm.
And so I thought like, okay, I wanted to open up a YouTube channel and really look like how I can tell some of these stories of these amazing players. And that's also why I found Flesh and Blood so interesting, because not only there are so many new TCG players in Flesh and Blood, but there are also other pro players approaching Flesh and Blood in a way that they are saying, you know what, I know what I'm doing. I'm such a good player. I can dive into this game and make a mark in it. And also, of course, with Star Wars Unlimited, with Lorcana and other games happening these days, other players are also going to that game to make that. But I think like everyone has like their own unique story, and not very much are known for that. And I recently had a player on my podcast that's called Thomas Rose. He's from the UK, who was like one of the big players back then in Yu-Gi-Oh! And now he's switching to Star Wars Unlimited, actually.
Okay.
And you were talking a lot about like this cost of making these tournaments happen, also specifically in what esports was able to do, but also like these tournaments that we are having in Flesh and Blood and Star Wars and Magic are costing a fortune. And so not only like the companies themselves need to spend money to compete in these games, but also the players themselves. And I speak with all of the pro players on my podcast about that, like what they think like this cost to competition should be and how they view it. And Thomas Rose, for example, specifically also said like he was looking to transition from Yu-Gi-Oh! To another TCG, and this cost to competition was like one of the top reasons why he wanted to switch as well. And so for him, for example, Flesh and Blood wasn't really that attractive because the game cost pretty much a fortune as well if you want to compete at the top.
Yeah.
But then he looked at Star Wars Unlimited. It's a lot cheaper. But this was for sure not the only reason. But I want to hear your opinion. Like, what are you seeing? This cost of competition be here in TCGs?
I mean, yeah, well, cost of competition is going to be something that exists in every competitive pursuit, right? I mean, in esports, you have to buy the equipment, right? You have to have the mouse, the keyboard, the PC, the console, the controller, whatever you need, right? In traditional sports, you need to have the gear, right? You got to buy the pads, the helmets, all that kind of stuff. There's the investment in, what college you go to, too, in traditional sports, too, right? So there's always going to be that, and card games have one of the lowest, competition costs, I suppose. But when you consider all that, but at the same time, it is still a significant investment for, a lot of people too, right? That was one of the things that bothered me a little bit with Flesh and Blood, especially after, becoming a dad and having to buy diapers and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of extra costs there. And suddenly I'm like, man, if I want to like play a new hero, I have to spend so much, like get all the cards for this, like, and that kind of was a thing that I felt like pushing me away from the game a little bit, which is sad, right? Because the game is great and I'd love to be able to play that stuff, but it just didn't make financial sense for me to do that, especially because I'm not a big competitive player too, right? Where a lot of those other games, I think a lot of TCGs are doing a good job of putting the high value in alternate art kind of things in chase cards versus just, you need this card for the deck, therefore it is $40 per, so I think there's that. Flesh and Blood is a unique, problem where you've got the equipment cards too, and so you still have a lot of equipment cards that are pretty pricey. And they're, to their credit, they're doing a lot to mitigate that, right, with reprints and things like that. But it's just kind of a unique thing game mechanic wise that's going to drive up the cost to change heroes, unless you just have a lot of generic equipment, right? But then you end up with stuff like Spring Tunic, right, where everybody needs it, and then that drives up the cost, right? So I think it's a little bit of it's an interesting challenge for them, right, to keep the costs low. But I think a lot of other card games have it easier, where you just put the high cost for cards on the alternate arts, right? You put on the chase stuff, and then the regular cards you need to play a deck with, you can put the higher rarity stuff, but you're going to be looking at max like what, $10-15 for a card or something, sometimes a little bit more, and that's a lot more achievable for people, so yeah, I mean, I can see why it would be a consideration for a pro player. I've never really been in that position where I'm going to enough events to think about that, I think on the broadcasting side that I'm, much more, attuned with, I just would like to see more done with the money that's spent on these broadcasts, right? Because a lot of times, you do spend a lot of money on a broadcast for a card game tournament, but there's not as much of a plan for, hey, we're going to fill the downtime with this. We're going to shoot extra content around this to have something to do in the downtime. We're going to get better about, getting our commentators out there on the floor to go get data that we can then report and stuff. And I think Flesh and Blood does a pretty good job with that, actually. I think they're one of the better games. Having been part of a couple of those broadcasts, I think that's something that the people making those are very aware of. And I think they're doing a pretty good job of moving towards that. But, there's other card game broadcasts where it's just like, show up and sit behind a table and talk about the game, and like, I don't think that's good value for the money that's being spent on the company side. I think you got to push your talent to do a little bit more than that, maybe that's just me being ambitious, but at the same time, I think, again, if we really want to push this whole scene forward, you gotta put in the extra work, right? If we're really the pioneers doing this, then we are going to work harder. We're going to have to work harder than basically everybody else that comes after us, right? That's just part of being a industry builder and a trailblazer. You have to take on the extra work, and so just people being aware that this is going to be necessary, I think, is going to help make that cost at least a little bit more worth it. But yeah, on the pro side of things, I think companies need to just keep keeping that in mind, and trying to craft their rarity slots, things like that, in a way that makes the game very accessible on a competitive level, that it's under $100 ideally to pick up a competitive deck, but then still include the collectability and the higher rarity kind of chase stuff.
Yeah, I think what you said about like the productions, I can just underline it because remembering back to the Yu-Gi-Oh days, I always found like the production was kind of good, but they were still lagging things that I was seeing like being done in sports, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, like I didn't really follow esports broadcasting that much besides like a few events, but I was seeing also that like esports at least got to the level of like what sports aspire to be. And also, I think like there are like players that are embodying, so to say, some of these like games. And for Yu-Gi-Oh specifically, of course, I'm knowing a lot of these players that are still in the game these days. And I think like these people are playing this game for like 15, 20 years. And I even met some of these players that play for that long in Magic the Gathering, like Simon Nielsen, for example, who also competes in Flesh and Blood these days.
Mm-hmm.
There's a guy called Kai Budde. He is a legend in Magic the Gathering, also a German player, which are just in Magic the Gathering, bringing this up here, being honored even. I think that I saw this, the Kai Budde trophy. It's like a thing now. So
wow,
I think it's crazy that we see a change happening also with like Flesh and Blood putting so much effort into it. But I think like for Yu-Gi-Oh specifically, I think there could be done more. And I'm so interested in seeing what, for example, One Piece, Lorcana, and Star Wars Unlimited in doing in this year, because for Lorcana specifically, we are having the first World Championship being held in this year.
Okay.
For One Piece, it's the second World Championship just around the corner as we are recording. And I think those are big opportunities, right? Specifically, I think for Disney Lorcana, I view it as like one of the big opportunities of the TCG sphere, because Disney Lorcana could really be a conqueror of Pokemon, right? They are trying to be like what Pokemon aspires to be. And in some kind of way, Disney can do what Pokemon could never do. And that is like getting the trophy of the first World Championship to the player in front of the Disney World. And that is like something that can make the news and be like public for everyone out there. And that is of an interest that I think like something compared to like Star Wars Unlimited, for example, is very hard to reach, right? So there are some unique opportunities in this year that I'm just very curious to see.
Yeah, we'll see. I think players too have to be ready to be on camera, and ready to talk. And there's a reason why all the traditional athletes you see in like baseball, football, soccer, all that, they all have media training, right? They are all trained to be able to talk on camera and know, how to act, what to say, and all that. We don't have that. We have that a little bit in esports, but not even that much. We definitely don't have it at all in card games, right? So I just think the players themselves need to be very open to doing interviews, to being in content pieces on the side, and not having this attitude where it's like, oh, I'm losing 30 minutes of practice time. Oh, no. It's like, yeah, but the thing is, if you want to be a professional athlete, if you want to be a professional player in this game, you need to take on the entire job, right? And part of the job is promotion. Like, and this is self-promotion for you. And so you need to be doing this stuff, right? Because it's good for the game. It's good for you. It's worth taking that time. You got to ditch the shyness, right? And just be willing to be on camera, be yourself, and there's people out there that can help with that. I'll say this, if any pro player out there wants to get better on camera, wants to be better doing interviews, just send me a message on Twitter or something like that. I'm happy to help you, But I think that's another side of it too, is that the players need to start to be ready to be open to do this other sort of like not just sit down and play kind of content,
Yeah, definitely. It's like being a pro player in the future in TCGs has like so many different dimensions that I think like it's not only about playing, right? And you are making that clear here.
Mm-hmm.
I think also like that aspect of pro players, if they really want to make a living off of this, they are kind of in the position that they also need to make sure they have other revenue streams. And one of that is, of course, making content. And there you are also learning a lot about like being in front of the camera, coming to the point, being funny, making a statement, making a story out of what just happened. And so I think like it's also an opportunity for those players, right? To grow as a person, but also to grow as the player that you aspire to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that, funnily enough, like with Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, with the players that I even like travel to tournaments and have seen compete in these tournaments back then in 2016 to 2019. And these days they are like big content creators and making like content on a regular basis. And I'm like, wow, this person has really grown out. And from being a very shy person to sitting in front of the camera like nearly every day and streaming. That's crazy to see. And I'm very happy about that, actually.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely should.
Yeah, definitely. I think also like when we are talking about all of these different games, and I'm very curious on your Yu-Gi-Oh view specifically, because not every TCG that we have at this moment of recording can be as successful as they aspire to be, right? We can't have like 10 or 20 trading card games that are all on the top. And so what is your opinion on this, like 5 to 10 years down the line? What do you think is like the driving factor and the main like points that a TCG needs to take off to be like what Magic the Gathering is after 30 years, what Yu-Gi-Oh is after 25 years?
I think more than anything, you just have to have a great core gameplay loop, and that is, you just have to enjoy playing the game, And I think games that can do that, and regardless of the deck that you're playing, you can have that sort of like good feel while you're playing it. I think those are the games that'll really, really succeed, And it doesn't take a lot to knock people off of that, right? All it takes is, one meta where one deck plays very differently and just crushes everything, and that can drive a lot of people away. But you are right in that, in a few years, we're not going to see, probably not going to see anyway, this many games coming out, because a lot of people are going to try it. A lot of people aren't going to succeed. And so we're going to see that decline again, but the question of what games will continue to be big, I think, I don't have any opinion on Yu-Gi-Oh just because like I've never played that game. I don't know anything about it. It sounds wild. I've heard they don't even have like rotations, so you can still play cards from like 30 years ago or something like that. I don't know. It sounds crazy to me, but like, it's hard to say that one's going to go anywhere, right? Because it's still around these days. But I think Magic the Gathering is still going to be around. Obviously, it's just too big. Commander. The funny thing is, I think Commander really saved that game. I think the cost of playing Modern was very prohibitive. Standard, like, things are just changing too fast, and Standard coming out too quickly. I've heard Standard's good at the moment, but for a lot of times it didn't feel good. But Commander is just such a great, fun way to engage with the game that anyone can do, and it's it's just gonna always exist and help out. The funny thing is, Commander is probably like the most complex way to engage with the game. But you've got enough experienced players that are gonna help some new players get into it, around the table, and it's casual and it's fun, so that's there. As far as other games go, I mean, Pokemon's interesting because I feel like I hear more people kind of like trash talking it now than I've ever heard before. And on the video game side of things, it's still going well, obviously, but then there's other people that have a lot of complaints about it too, where graphically it's not keeping up with other things. It just hasn't really, funny enough, Pokemon hasn't evolved to stay with the times, really, it seems like. So I don't know what'll happen with that. I think it's Pokemon. It's still mega popular, right? So I doubt it's going anywhere. But that's when I think they need to sort of change and modernize a little bit too, maybe. But as far as some of the newer games that came out, we're just in like One Piece mania worldwide right now, so I think a lot of the hype around the intellectual property is driving that game, but at the same time, or at least it's driving people to try the game. But that said, I think the game has a lot of really great looking cards for collectors. The game itself is really fun. It's very deep in a different way. It's very mathy in a way that a lot of other card games aren't right now. I don't know why I'm burping so much at the moment, but like it's very mathy, and so it provides sort of a different kind of thought process when you're going through, especially some of the later turns in a game. So it is unique in that way. And they can kind of just go forever with it too, right? One Piece has been around for a long time, so they've got an enormous amount to draw from when it comes to card creation. I think the designers behind the game are pretty good at coming up with fresh stuff each set. And so that one seems like it'll stick, Digimon's another one that's been around for a long time. Although that's kind of come and gone. It's through different iterations, so who knows with that. This one seems to be pretty popular, though. And then you've got Star Wars Unlimited, obviously, one of the newcomers, which I'm totally in love with that game. I think it plays differently from any other card game out there right now because of the action system. There's not really turns. There's just a phase where you and your opponent go back and forth action-wise. So the way I put it is that the game kind of always operates at instant speed because you always have a chance to immediately respond to whatever your opponent just did. But it creates such an interesting, not to use the extremely cliche term of chess-like, but it really is, right? Where you have to plan out your moves ahead of time and then be ready to adjust based on your opponent's moves. You can use your moves to try to dictate what your opponent does, right? In a way that you can't really do in a lot of other card games. It's not really about combos per se. It's about sort of outmaneuvering your opponent strategically in a way that doesn't exist in other card games. So, and it's Star Wars, and so I'd like to think game mechanics alone. In fact, I know a lot of players now that they're like, I don't care about Star Wars, but the game is just so good. They'll keep playing it, which is interesting because Star Wars as an IP is in a rough place right now, right? Where we've had some pretty big hits like Andor, and I think Skeleton Crew was really good actually. But people aren't watching those because they're too different from the norm, They're too different from the nostalgia bait stuff that are the other things that have been made, but a lot of the other stuff has been not good. And so who knows what's going to happen with Star Wars in the future as an IP. It'll probably always be around, but I think Star Wars popularity in the nerd zeitgeist is starting to wane a little bit, So I think that said, I do think that game can stand the test of time on the game mechanics, and Star Wars is a bonus rather than the number one draw. So I'd like to think that'll be around. I think it will be. I think it's certainly good enough, but we're just now hitting 1 year with the game, and it's been going well, but it's too early to tell, But I'm happy to put some big bets on it. I love that game. And then Flesh and Blood, obviously, I think Flesh and Blood is just a fantastic game mechanically. I think there are some challenges in terms of the financial barriers that we talked about earlier. I myself am not a big fan of how expansions are done now, where I really liked it when it was one big core thing and then a supplemental set, and we just went back and forth with that. Now I feel like you have to wait a long time if you're a big fan of one particular class or something to get support for that, The expansion slot stuff just is not hitting, I think, for a lot of classes. So I think there's some challenges to overcome in terms of like how that game is made on an expansion level, that are currently harming it a bit at the moment, but I don't know how much of a long-term effect that's going to be. But again, just mechanically, like I said before, I think it's the most complex game out there, which in my mind is a great thing. That is also another challenge for bringing in new players, of course. So I'd love to see it survive. I hope there's a world where Flesh and Blood is still around 20, 30 years from now. But it has some unique challenges, I think, to overcome. So it's hard to say for sure. But I don't know. I think that's kind of a basic list of the big ones out there at the moment. Maybe I'm missing a couple, but I think there's a really good chance that it'll be some subset of those games that I just talked about that'll be the ones that are going to be around 10 years from now.
Yeah, that's that's also what I'm getting from talking to different pro players from different scenes. And I'm also like seeing that, for example, what you talked about in the beginning, like these big three that we have, they ain't going nowhere, right? Even though there are players who want to change to another game or who maybe even want to play two games at the same time, like Simon Nielsen does with Flesh and Blood and Magic the Gathering. There is something to those games that make them stick around, right? And even if that's only, let's take that in like Klamas, as we say it in German, because of course a game like Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh can not only live off of the pro circuit, right? They have like those casual players, as you talked about as well in Magic the Gathering. I know those players as well in Yu-Gi-Oh. We don't really have something like Commander in Yu-Gi-Oh, but we for sure have those old school formats. We have the tabletop, the kitchen table format, which basically everyone just plays what they want. And that's also kind of funny. But I think like Flesh and Blood, for example, Star Wars Unlimited and One Piece, you talked about that as well. Those games have the IP, right? And Flesh and Blood don't really have that yet. Even though I love to collect Flesh and Blood cards, I think those are one of the most amazing and most beautiful cards ever
the
printed
art in
in
Flesh
TCGs.
and Blood is the best of any card game right now. I think like
Exactly.
the quality of the art is just incredible. It's like Flesh and Blood, and then Sorcery has amazing art actually.
Oh, yeah.
And then Magic, I would say, are like the big three in my mind art wise. But yeah, Flesh and Blood is absolutely beautiful game.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like that's something, funnily enough, when I talked to Thomas Rose, that didn't really come up for a pro player, right? Of course,
they don't care about
important.
art.
No, they don't care.
Or it's
like,
a side thing. It's not that they don't care. It's just that it's not important to them as competitive players. Yeah. Which why would it be, Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like important that the card is well designed, right? That you can read the cards very fast, that the text is not too long. You can see all the different points at the first glance. But I think like Star Wars Unlimited, the feedback that I heard so far is that most people don't really like the art, but they really like how the card is designed for playing the card out.
Yeah, I think
is something very unique.
It's funny because I do think Unlimited has some of the most uneven art in card games right now, where like some of it's really good, but some of it is just really, really bad too. but yeah, I mean, from a design standpoint, the cards are all laid out very well. Graphic design wise, they're killing it. All the logos are really, really good. The icons are great. But yeah, just like, I don't know what it is. They wanted to go for a little bit more of a comic book kind of style, I guess, which I get. I mean, you don't want to be yet another card game, yet another Star Wars card game that uses movie stills or that kind of hyper realistic kind of stuff. So they tried to go in a unique way artistically, which I think is totally fine. But yeah, I think the quality is very uneven in that game, and that is one of my main complaints with it too. But yeah, again, like all that stuff is kind of tertiary to the fact that it's just a really, really great card game.
Yeah. And also like coming to Thomas Rose as an example here again, a Yu-Gi-Oh player switched to Star Wars Unlimited. He really said that Star Wars Unlimited is the best game that he has ever played, and that it really sparked again that enjoyment for diving into a game and wanting to discover really like decks that aren't really found yet, because that is like the specialty of him being a Yu-Gi-Oh player. He really wanted always to find that one spot in the meta where he can like bring a surprise to the table and win that wise.
That's the
And
best
so
game
he
for that
really-
right now. Absolutely. That absolutely 100% without question. Star Wars Unlimited is the best game for off meta people. And I'm one of those people too. So I feel that as well, where the way that deck construction works in that game, I think we're always going to have the widest meta of any card game because there is just so much flexibility, and it's flexibility that works too, you know? And a lot of it is really based on the fact that the game mechanics favor player's skill over the stack of cards you have in front of you, you know? There's a gigantic difference between a good player and a bad player with the same deck in this game, you know? But again, because of deck construction, you can really do anything you want, you know? We just had our store showdown for Star Wars Unlimited this last weekend, and I brought a deck that like literally nobody else in the world is talking about. And it's a style of play that everyone kind of says is trash kind of right now. But I really believed in it, and I grinded reps with the deck. I got good with it, and then I also found a list that was good enough to hang, and I ended up taking semifinal. I made it to the semis, you know, which is pretty good. I think, you know, for a completely off meta deck that nobody has, you know, heard of or cares about, you know. But that's just the kind of thing you can do in Star Wars Unlimited, you know. I mean, in set 1 of that game, which had the best set 1 meta of any card game in history, I took what was, universally called the worst leader in a set and won a local with it, you know, because you
That's
could
crazy.
just, I wanted to prove that it was just like player skill above all in that game, you know, and it was hard, right? I had a much more difficult path to victory than other people playing the better decks, but it's possible, you know, which is, yeah, I mean, man, like that game is just, I think it's the best card game out right now, personally. But it is definitely like an off meta deck brewer's dream card game for sure.
Yeah. I also really think that like those examples of like deconstruction and discovering a new game is what like makes players excited all in all about these new games,
Yeah,
because
for sure.
Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh! They are around for so long and they are so deep. You can dive into them. But if you're playing them for a long time, there's a need for a refresh, right? That's also, I think, like Simon Nielsen, for example, talks about when he goes to a Flesh and Blood tournament. He specifically said in one of my podcasts that Magic the Gathering is his job and Flesh and Blood is his hobby. He really just plays it for the fun, but it's nice that he always delivers, right? He won a calling recently, the calling in Prague. He was the winner of that one. And he also, like, just a few months after he entered the game, became the national champion of Denmark, which is crazy, right?
Good players are good players, you know?
That's right, yeah. But I want to come to one example here of a player that also switched from Yu-Gi-Oh! To Disney Lorcana, and his name is Din Kang Pham, which I also do podcast with as well.
Okay.
And he specifically, for example, said that he wanted to really come to a new game also and experience something that isn't really available in Yu-Gi-Oh! For example. That is like, he wanted to dive into the game and get like the rewards out of it for also traveling the world. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Specifically is really bad on delivering for the top players on value-wise, because everything that you get are like a small prize card and a playmat. And I think in this circuit, in this year, they added like metal dice to it. But the prize cards are really not that worth it compared to like Pro Tour champion cards in Flesh and Blood, for example. And so it wasn't really like worth him to put in the time and effort to be one of the best like 3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Players in the world compared to like Flesh and Blood, for example, or Disney Lorcana, the game that he chose. And actually, a few weeks prior to us recording this podcast, he made a very bold move. And that's what I want to tell you, because I think it's a really unique story.
All right.
He entered Disney Lorcana, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but there are these golden Mickeys. Those are the prize cards in Disney Lorcana. I think they're ranging worth from 10 to 15K. And of course, if they are grading well, they are worth more. But those are the prize cards. And then this was his first goal. He ticked it off like very fast, winning that prize card after he entered the game. And then he wanted to win one of the DLCs, which is like a calling or Pro Tour level game tournament in Disney Lorcana. And there are not that many, right, in Disney Lorcana. So he took a flight all the way to Melbourne from Germany to play in the last DLC in this circuit leading up to the World Championship in Disney Lorcana. And in Disney Lorcana, there are only like 22 spots for the World Championship compared to Flesh and Blood, where basically everyone can compete. So that's crazy. And there were like, I think it was even the 2 last spots at that tournament that you can enter the World Championship. And that was his last goal, right? Winning that tournament and then going to the World Championship and winning the Worlds. That's not coming yet, but he flew to Melbourne all the way and he won that DLC. And so it totally paid off for him, right? To switch from Yu-Gi-Oh! To Disney Lorcana, put in the work, find the best deck, and then also fly all over the world. And that's, I think, what these crazy stories are made of. And I'm talking to so many pro players on this podcast, and also now to you bringing in a totally new view from a commentary side. Which is like making this whole TCG sphere so amazing and so inspiring to be in. And I think what you said throughout this podcast is that we should look more on this like inspiration points with players actually is pursuing these careers even in these pro circuits. And that's just what I wanted to bring up here with Din Kang Farm as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think at the end, I've always said at the end of the day, people are fans of players, not plays, right? You can have the most amazing, right, thing you've seen ever, right? Everyone knows the Evo moment where, Daigo beats Justin Wong, right, with Ken, but with all the parrying, and that's an amazing play, right? But at the end of the day, people are going to be fans of Daigo, right? They're going to be fans of Justin Wong. They're going to follow them, right? I mean, Justin Wong is a great content creator and everything, and he's still a great player and everything, and Daigo's out there winning tournaments, and, people will follow them because of the totality of their careers and all the moves they've made, not just because of that one thing, So when we're commentating card game tournaments and all that, and, we see those great plays, it's important to, celebrate those great plays and make memorable moments out of those, but make sure that we're using those moments to help people find other human beings to cheer for and watch and, follow, right, as fans. We got to make sure that's the main focus too, right? Because then that's going to elevate the players, but then it's also going to make sure that, as a sport, there's going to be a longevity to this that didn't exist before. So that's the hope. That's what we're going to try anyway. And fingers crossed, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, definitely. I think also what you're bringing up is leading to my, how do you say it in English? I have 2 last points. My
penultimate point?
My vorletzter Punkt. Mein vorletzter Punkt, as we say in German.
Wow, it's also a long word. I mean, if it's the second to last, it'd be penultimate in English. So right. There you go. We got a long word for that too, yeah.
Yeah. So you talked about like sports again here in comparison to TCGs and competing in esports as well. And I think like specifically one factor that comes up again and again, also for those pro players competing in TCGs, is the factor of luck in winning a big tournament.
Sure.
How do you view this factor? Of course, from a commentary standpoint, that's something amazing, as we also saw at Pro Tour LA happening with Arthur Treyhead getting that sink below draw with the sigil.
Oh, yeah,
that was like a crazy luck moment. I also recently talked to him here on the podcast, and he told me that there was even much more luck involved to him winning in this Pro Tour. So for everyone who is interested in that story, go to my channel and watch that. But what is your opinion and your also experience casting the games in luck?
I mean, topping in TCGs, like topping tournaments regularly is skill. Winning tournaments will always require a little bit of luck. It's just the nature of the games that we play, right? You are drawing cards randomly off the top of a deck, so there will always be that element. And I've always said, if you don't like that, then this isn't the game for you, right? That said, what luck is really at the end of the day is the combination of preparation and opportunity. A lot of times you'll see what looks like an amazing top deck and you're like, oh, so lucky. But you got to go back and look at the rest of that game and see how the way they played it set themselves up to be able to take advantage of that draw, because a lot of times it's the skillful decisions earlier in the game that make that the top deck, right? That draw would not have mattered at all if they wouldn't have made the same decisions earlier in the game. So that's, I think, and that's an important thing to remember when you're playing at your local tournaments too, right? And you're like, oh, I can't believe they do that and all that. You have to look back at what your decisions were, what their decisions were, because that's going to have an impact in it too. Again, like luck is the combination of preparation and opportunity, So I have zero problems at all with top decking kind of situations. There will always be a luck element to card games. That is just the way the game is, that's the way every competitive, endeavor is too, right? I mean, in football, maybe the refs will, judge something a certain way one time and not a different time. And that's a little bit lucky, right? Maybe somebody makes a catch that would be impossible to make otherwise, a little bit lucky, right? But all the reps that player put in, running routes and making catches, that put them in the position to be able to do that kind of crazy thing, right? So it's like, yeah, that doesn't bother me at all. Like when people talk about luck, I'm just like, well, you're just refusing to acknowledge the true skill that people have in these games, right? That helps them take advantage of that, There'll always be a little bit of luck, but, have fun with it, and if you're the player on the losing end, if you've chosen this as your competitive profession, you have to accept it, right? And so you just, at the end of the day, you just shake your head and you're like, well, I did everything I could. You have to be satisfied with your own level of play at the end of the day. And if you're satisfied with that, you can be unhappy, but you can't, I think, be angry, about it.
Yeah, I think TCGs are made of that, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about it as an inherent thing to the TCG. And for me specifically, growing up with Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, it was always the heart of the cards, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That was
Heart of the cards.
what made me.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing to have in TCGs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a fun element. It's certainly great from a broadcasting perspective because we can get those big hype moments too. But yeah, you just can't forget about all the other turns that happened before it, right? I think that's the important thing.
Yeah. And with that, I want to come to the last point actually of this podcast, and that is talking a little bit more personal here with you, because I actually want to congratulate you on becoming a father at first.
Oh,
I want to wish you all the best for your family. And then I specifically remember you mentioning miniature gaming as well, being a part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
I also discovered miniature gaming actually pretty early on in my life as well. There was like a TV series when I was really young, and in the TV series there was like a private school, and one of the children was like really rich, and he had like an army of miniatures, and I was like, wow, that's looking crazy. And I was also loving to paint, and so I was always aspiring when I'm getting a little bit older to have my first miniatures and paint them. And I remember like me not having a TCG store in the city, but I heard that there was a Warhammer store nearby. And so I took the train and I traveled there and got my first miniatures.
Nice.
And so I think that is also something that is not to underestimate, right? Just this like enjoyment that we have in these games. Also talking just nearly about competition all the time in this podcast. But I think we can find like joy and fun in these games as well, not only in like miniatures. And so I want to hear some of your like most memorable moments here. I want to ask you at first, like, what is like for you the most unique moment of your career? Is it like playing League of Legends and then getting to cast a game? Is it like being in one of the biggest leagues of all time, the Overwatch League? Or is it then coming to the first World Championship in Flesh and Blood? Like, what is that moment that you are always remembering?
It's tough because there's been so many, I mean, there's been so many really amazing moments throughout this, and I just feel very, fortunate that and like blessed that I was able to, be in this career. It's just been a ton of fun to be in front of the camera and get excited about these players and all that. But as far as specific moments go, I think the big one everyone would probably talk about if Yasum was the Faker Ryu duel in League of Legends, right? The Zed versus Zed, and that was just an incredible moment mechanically, but coming at an incredible time in that series too, and so being able to experience that in person was great. There's other big moments like the getting to make the final play call for the first grand finals for the Overwatch League was special to me after all the work, years of work I'd put into that to get to that point. And then, just being able to be part of Flesh and Blood's first world championships too, I mean, that felt really, really fun and right after being in card games for so long, to then be able to take everything I'd learned in esports from a commentary perspective and try to apply that to this other love of mine that I'd had since I was a kid, that 9-10-year-old kid playing Magic for the first time. I think he would think that was pretty cool, if he knew that, in the future he'd get to, be on the microphone calling the action for big tournaments in these card games, so I'm happy to be doing things that my younger self would have thought was cool, you know? So yeah, that's all really big, and just every time I get to go to an event, it's really special, you know? So I just hope I can keep doing it, you know? Eventually they're going to say I'm too old, but we're getting there, but we're not quite there yet. We're close. We're close, but we're not quite there yet. And so hopefully I'll find something to do after that.
Man, I'm excited to see what's coming next for you for sure. But I want to know now, what is like a time in your career that you are maybe down, or you learned something very important that you also want to give out to the viewers here?
I think a good thing to keep in mind is always always never, don't forget your enjoyment of the game. You know, try your best not to get jaded, because when you're doing this professionally too, you know, I talk about it being a lot of fun, but a lot of the business around it is not as fun, right? Where you're having to like hound these tournament organizers to get paid because it's been more than a month and they still haven't paid you and all that. Esports tournament organizers, game companies trying to cut your pay and stuff like that when you've been working like crazy, but they just, you know, they won't respect that, you know, and even though like you're the face of their game, you know, you are the best promotion they've got, you know, when it comes to the competitive side, and they treat you that way, you know. It's easy to get jaded on the industry, and I definitely have felt that way from time to time. But it's important to never forget to separate the business from the work, right? You have to you should do your best to not let the irritating parts of the business side of things affect you on camera, you know, and affect your love of the game itself, because the game isn't responsible for any of the negative stuff, right? So you can't, you know, take it out on that, you know, and I think that's a good lesson, because people will get discouraged and things, and you know, that makes them want to quit, that makes them want to, you know, not put as much effort into the broadcast. But you know, at the end of the day, the broadcast is for the fans. You're trying to entertain people, and you never know what people are going through too. So I've had multiple people over the years come up, and more than one person come up over the years and say, hey, I had cancer, and I was going through chemotherapy, and I literally couldn't get up off the couch or out of the chair, and watching, you know, your broadcasts and you know, having you make me laugh really helped me get through that. And you know, when you hear things like that, you're like, man, I'm such a baby if I ever let, you know, my business woes affect the quality of my broadcasting, right? Because you never know what it's going to mean to someone. It seems silly to be out there yelling about video games, but you always want to make sure you're doing your best, because somebody might, you know, really be relying on it, you know? So I think that's important to remember. So I'll end with that.
Man, that's perfect. Definitely. I also want to know, like, if you could only choose 3 digital games to play forever, what would those games be?
Oh, wow. I mean, World of Warcraft, easy. Like that, I've been playing that for 20 years now. So definitely World of Warcraft. I would say Chrono Trigger, which in my opinion is the best video game of all time. It's a JRPG from the 90s. It's great. As far as the third game goes, that's tough. I feel like I should pick some sort of competitive game. I don't know, or just some chill game, right? That's tough. Like the first 2 are easy, but that third game is really, really hard. I would maybe pick something like I'd probably pick something like Mario Kart or something, you know, a easy, just fun game to get on and play with some friends and just have a good time, you know, party kind of game. So I think one of those, I think that covers it, right? Where you've got the great, you know, multiplayer grindy element, you've got the great single player element, and then you've got just a chill fun thing. So I'll go with those 3. We'll go with World of Warcraft, Chrono Trigger, and Mario Kart.
All right. I will also tell you my 3 games that I would play if I only could play 3. And I also am like connecting those to the moments where I was playing them. And that at first is like a game called Burrito Bison. It's kind of funny. It's kind of funny because that's a browser game.
Oh, okay.
And I always played that when I was in apprenticeship. And it's funny because I met a guy called Andres, one of my best friends in apprenticeship back then. We were doing like filmmaking and stuff. And that was also leading to my YouTube channel a long time ago. But there was basically a game where you are a bison that is jumping out of an arena because he is a wrestler. and there are a lot of gummy bears running around. And so you always need to catch gummy bears with him and try to make a record. That's pretty crazy. But then the second game is actually Warcraft 3.
Oh, yeah.
With the Battle.net.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like I remember back, there were so many hours that I put into this game. And then also the times where like everyone was online playing in the Battle.net, right? The guys from school, friends. And so I think that would be a game for me. And then as well, I think there is Halo from Xbox.
Oh, yeah.
From the first Xbox. That I think is my third game.
That was in consideration for me for the third game, I think. I spent so many hours on Halo 1. That's where my ID comes from, actually. DoA.
Really?
Yeah. So it was originally Dead on Arrival because I had never played a console shooter before, so I just like couldn't control my Master Chief, right? Because like I just wasn't used to playing a game where you're moving and looking. Like I'd played GoldenEye, but like N64 controller is very different from Xbox controller as far as the mechanics of it goes. So I was just so bad, and I just got like slaughtered the first night. So then when I made my own character later, I named myself Dead on Arrival, and then that got shortened to DoA because other games couldn't handle the full leet speak thing because it was like DO4, 4RR1, it was all like early 2000s leet speak stuff. But yeah, and then some friends in college started calling me DoA, and that kind of is what I used from then on, So, but that actually does date back to Halo 1 in November of 2001 is when that came out. Yeah. Funny enough.
And it is very funny, that's for sure, because I didn't know what DoA means, so I looked it up before we met, and I was like, man, that makes sense. That makes sense. But I was curious on where it comes from.
Yep, that's from Halo.
So I'm happy that's crazy that you just bring it up. So then if we would play 3 versus 3 League of Legends, I know from back in the day, 3 versus 3
is this like Twisted Tree Line or whatever it is. The old there was like one 3v3 thing at one point, I think.
Yes, and that was the time like when I remember I was playing the game as well. And so if we would play against each other, my team of friends from school against your team of friends, what kind of like character would I face when I'm playing against you?
Oh, I always play the aggressive supports. Like Blitzcrank is still my favorite. I'd be grabbing people over walls. I love that character. For sure.
Perfect. So you would grab Jax a lot of times because I only play Jax.
Oh yeah. Well, that's not the character I want to grab over a wall into my lane, because then you just hit the W or whatever it is and just hop away or hop onto somebody else and destroy them. So yeah, that wouldn't be as great. But yeah, I'd be trying. I'd be going for other people.
Perfect. So then tell me, like, what is the next miniature that you want to paint when you get back into it?
It's a good question. I'm planning on doing a little bit next month, and I've got all the Stormlight Archive miniatures from the Brandon Sanderson novels, and so I've been looking at painting those. Otherwise, I've got an unopened Space Marines Combat Patrol that I need to get to eventually and pick a color scheme for. I don't know, but yeah, it's something like that. And then Gundam Assemble, I guess, isn't coming out until next year now, is what I heard. But I'm looking forward to painting those.
All right, so I wish you a lot of fun when you paint again the miniatures. And I also want to give you here at the end of the podcast the space to shout out anyone that you want to shout out.
Oh, well, let's see. Shout outs. Like, I'm not part of a team and I'm not like really sponsored by anybody or anything like that, but I guess I'll just shout out my content. I mean, if you go to GGDoA on YouTube, that's where you'll find my Bandai stuff usually, One Piece, Gundam, that kind of thing. Otherwise, Ice Cave Radio. There it is. That's my Star Wars Unlimited channel, and we've got a giant Discord with like 500 some people in it, and a lot of good conversation competition. So if you go to icecaveradio.com, you can find the podcast, you can find merch, you can find our Discord. That's a lot of fun. I do it with another guy named Charmer that is also a Flesh and Blood guy too, coincidentally. But so that's the other thing, and then I don't know, just yeah. Follow my socials, GGDoA, I guess. Thanks for all the support over the years, everybody. I really appreciate it. It's been a much longer career in gaming than I expected I would have, so we're just kind of trying to keep it going, So time will tell how long I'm able to be on camera with this. Hopefully, I'd like to make it to 20 years, but I think by then it'll be some sort of hybrid on-camera and off-camera role for me, but we'll see.
I definitely wish you all of the best luck for those and
Thank
having fun as well. And I'm also so happy that we made this podcast episode happen. Thank you so much for
Yeah, it was a
taking
ton
the
of fun.
time, Erik.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.